So we've already opened our meeting, so we don't need to do that again. So we're going to roll right into public comment, if there is any. And for folks who this is your first board meeting, there's a lot of procedures and policies that we follow in these meetings. And if they're unclear at all, you can ask the person next to you or raise your hand for an explanation, and we'll pause to kind of fill in people. But if it feels like a lot of new things tonight, that's totally normal. And we'll make sure to meet with all the new board members, the adult board members, and the student reps to kind of go over everything now that everyone is officially official. So beautiful. Okay, so public comment. Yeah. So if you would like to give public comment, you can come up to the podium, or you can raise your hand on Zoom. I'm gonna look at that. Carrie, are you going to give public comment?
I'm ready if you are.
I am. I think you're fairly familiar with the guidelines, so I'm not going to read them all. But if for some reason you cross those guidelines, I'll just pause your time. But come on up.
Okay, thank you.
In 3 minutes.
I'll make it quick. Carrie Dowdy, Portland Education Association. 27 Fleetwood Street, Portland, Maine. I wanted to take a moment on behalf of the Portland Education Association to welcome the new school board members. Welcoming back Sarah, welcoming Fatuma, and welcoming you, Sarah. We look forward to working with you. Thanks.
Thank you. Beautiful.
She doesn't want to say hi to us.
And all the student board reps. Yes. Beautiful. Any other public comment? I see George Rowe on Zoom. George, you can come off mute when you're ready, and I'll give you your 3 minutes.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Congrats to the newly seated board members. My name is George Rowe. I live on Hanover Street, which is just a block across from the school headquarters on the Portland Street, Alder Street, and Cumberland Ave block. And I just wanted to make a note. This weekend, unfortunately, there was a vandal or vandals that were active in the neighborhood, and they tagged a lot of properties along many stretches of blocks in the West Bayside area, maybe beyond. But the school property, the school parking lot at 33 Portland Street, the entrance door for people, not the entrance door for the vehicles, was tagged. And then the wall along Alder Street for the school headquarters building was hit. I think maybe some of that was older than this weekend. But anyway, there was a bunch of tags there all the way up the hill to Cumberland. And I just want to make it clear that, this happens from time to time. I think this particular incident was probably strategic on the part of whoever did it, because they figured that if they did it right before the cold weather sets in, that it'll be virtually impossible for anyone to do anything about it until spring. So there may be a warm up on Friday that may give the school facilities people maybe time to just cover some of this nonsense up. But it is a possibility as we deal with the winter months, for maybe a project for maybe even some of the student representatives in attendance tonight, to maybe talk about some ways to maybe do some creative murals along these stretches. When the vandals strike, they usually actually are pretty good about identifying visible things that people would see. And so it's an opportunity for maybe us to put something nice and creative and artistic up there, rather than something just, sort of mindless almost. So again, I can send some pictures. If somebody needs that done, I can send an email so you all have at least a visual representation of what this looks like when it happens. But you guys are part of the West Bayside neighborhood, and I really think it's important for you to get on top of this when this happens. Again, it's not necessarily your fault, but it's really important for you to be good neighbors and address things that happen to your property, in a very timely manner so that you discourage this stuff from happening again and again and again. Thanks so much, and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you, George. Would anyone else like to give public comment? Okay, so I am not seeing anyone else. So we're going to close public comment. Typically, I would give remarks at this point, but I've already spoken a lot tonight. So the only thing that I just wanted to note is that Board Member Grant will be chairing the Public Affairs Committee moving forward to take Board Member Russell Better's place. The rest of the committee assignments I'll be announcing. Yeah, you're right. Hold on. Yes, because you are doing policy and curriculum. Yes, apologies. So Vice Chair Bondo is moving into chair the Policy and Curriculum Committee. Board Member Grant is moving into chair Public Affairs, which Board Member Bondo did in the past. And the other committee assignments I'll be communicating at fully by email to the board and at the next board meeting publicly. So with that, then I'm going to turn it over to the report of the superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Henry, I think we're having trouble with the mic.
Test.
Yeah, that one works. Great. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. It is nice to see both the celebration and the ceremony at the beginning of the meeting to thank board members Youssef and Russell Better, as well as to welcome all of the new members tonight. If there's one thing you will learn about me and know about me is I'm about digging into the work and about diving into where we're at as a district. And tonight will be no different. And so tonight, my superintendent comments will focus on progress monitoring for our third objective for this year. Just to orient folks, Chair Lentz went over the fact that this year, prior to our 5-year strategic plan, we have 4 priority areas that we are focused on this year. And I just want to orient you in board docs, you will see all 4 of the objectives as well as the key initiatives under them. And so each objective is sort of the headline. Tonight, we will be progress monitoring objective 3, which is we provide students with a challenging, relevant, and joyful education that prepares and empowers students to pursue their dreams. And under that objective, there are 2 initiatives that we're working on this year. The first is we are strengthening core instruction and literacy through the implementation of 2 programs, CKAA and EL curriculum. And those are focused in grades K to 8. And the second is that we are cultivating safe and equitable schools by implementing PBIS action plans to develop systems and structures for school culture that utilize restorative practices and alternatives to suspension to respond to unexpected behaviors. As we move forward with the idea of having both objectives as well as progress monitoring, it was not to stand before you and to tell you that everything is perfect. It is instead to keep you informed and have you push our practice around these key priorities. And tonight will be no different as we share with you where we are at with these 2 initiatives. What you can see up on the screen right now is sort of how I think of the process around progress monitoring. So these objectives were established with the board in September. The departments then put these actions or these initiatives into action, and they develop action plans. We monitor them at both the department and at the executive team or cabinet level to monitor progress throughout the year. And then twice a year, we come to the board and share with you an update. We then at the central office take the feedback that we've received at the cabinet level as well as at the board, and we adjust our plans to again continue to pursue both these objectives and these initiatives. On the next slide, you will see that each of the key objectives will be monitored twice this year. So our first monitoring happened with objective 2 on November 21st. Tonight we will monitor objective 3. and we will come back to this same objective in March 19th. And so my hope is that the collective holds us accountable, not necessarily that everything is perfect on March 19th, but that what you hear on March 19th has taken your feedback, adjusted our plan in some ways, and that you're seeing progress. And so at the end of this year, I don't anticipate that we will sit here and say that everything is perfect and everything is exactly where it needs to be. But I do anticipate that we will be standing here before you, telling you that we've seen progress in each of these and that you will see progress from one meeting to the next. And so tonight, similar to all progress monitoring, I'm excited to have the staff that are most immersed in this work at the central office able to come and to share with you where we're at on this. And so you will hear from Deputy Superintendent Townsend and then central office team members for both the rollout and implementation of the English curriculum and then for the climate and culture work that we're doing. And so with that, I will pass it over to Deputy Superintendent Townsend, and we'll go through the two, and then we'll take questions at the end around both of the initiatives and the progress to date. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Superintendent Scallon. And again, welcome new board members. It's wonderful to have you here with us this evening. And good evening, all of our returning board members. So I do want to start with some additional introductions. So we have an amazing team that has been leading this work in partnership with our leaders and teachers and staff at the building level. But as I go around, we have Cindy Sewell, who folks will remember is our literacy teacher leader on the academic team. Jesse Robinson, our Director of Curriculum and Instruction. Joanna Frankel, our Assistant Director of MTSS Implementation for elementary, focusing on elementary. And Dr. Chris Reiger, our Director of Mental and Behavioral Health. And of course, then instrumental as well is Dr. Angela Atkinson-Duina, supervising this work at our elementary schools, and Dr. Abdullahi Ahmed, supervising at our secondary schools. So all of them will be available. I'll do the quick overview of our kind of progress monitoring slides, and then everybody's here and available this evening, for questions and discussion about the status of the work. So as Superintendent Scallon said, we're focusing this evening on the third objective around, really that academic and cultural experience that our students have day to day. And so we have two priorities that we are focused on this year. The first is the implementation of new literacy curricula. So CKAA is a foundational skills literacy curriculum in grades K through 2. And the ELA curriculum is being implemented in grades K through 8 this year. So we'll talk a little bit more about the status of that, but we're excited, and we'll go in detail in a moment, to feel like at this point, at this benchmark, that work is on track. We're continuing to kind of do our work around building safe and equitable schools, and we'll get deeper into kind of where we stand. The high level assessment is, in November after the end of the first trimester of the year, seeing that work at risk, and we'll kind of talk in detail in a moment about the differences that we're seeing and some of the challenges and some of the many accomplishments that we've had thus far this fall. So I'll begin first with talking about some status of our literacy implementation. So to monitor our progress on our literacy implementation, we have been focused on two measures. The first measure is assessing the quality of implementation. What is it looking like for students day to day as they experience the curricula? So we have done systematic walkthroughs. So Jesse, Cindy, another colleague on our academic team visited 116 classrooms across K through 8, using some tools that in partnership from the curricula and our implementation support from BAR to kind of measure both the teacher facilitation as well as the student responses. And so we see, so obviously this is our first year of launch, so there was no kind of assessment last year, and just even conducting walkthroughs to monitor progress in this way, just to have this data is the first time we've been able to do this. So it's a huge credit to Jesse, Cindy, the team, the school leaders, and the teachers for opening up their classrooms and schools and using this to help inform how we're doing. So, our implementation partners suggest that we would expect that at this stage, because it's a brand new curricula for folks, that you would expect to see 70% or so of teachers still at the beginning. There's kind of three levels: beginning, approaching, and quality in the rubric that you would expect to see, because they've just begun, about 70% of teachers at the beginning stage. So you can see as of this fall baseline, we're exceeding that in both curricula and significantly so in CKLA. So we're working to continue to ramp those numbers up over the course of the year. And we have 2 additional walkthroughs that'll be scheduled that'll inform our progress monitoring over the course of the year. The second set of measures that we're looking at is trying to monitor some of our interim assessments so that we can start to understand how the implementation of curricula is impacting student performance. So the first set of measures you see come from a foundational skills assessment called Early Bird. And so, I'll name that Early Bird, it really is designed, and Cindy and Jesse can speak to this in depth, as an instructional tool. It's designed for teachers to give them data to help inform how to continue to support their students. So we're using it, as well, because it's the best data we have, and it's tracking along with what the curriculum implementation is. But it doesn't offer a nice, neat, clean measure, right, for us to look at. So what you see in the end of year column, we used Early Bird last year because we had been implementing a few different phonics programs. This year, CKLA is kind of a unified program that we're implementing. And what you see is some of the key measures, the kindergarten ones, letter name, rhyming, and blending. Those are 3 skills for kindergartners that we focus on that really form the foundation for them to become readers. At first grade, we focus on non-word reading. So that's their students' ability to kind of articulate words that they're seeing, but without the aid of context clues, without the aid of memorization and kind of sight words, right, that they're really able to execute kind of those foundational skills associated there. And then in second grade, non-word fluency. So how quickly they're able to move so that they can be able to kind of move at pace over the course of the year. So what you see is, in the left column is kind of where we ended last year. I wouldn't call that, so that was where we ended up last year. After the first administration of Early Bird, you can see the results in the different categories as where we stand now. So we'll do 2 more administrations of Early Bird over the course of the year. So by the time we come back in March, we'll start to see what progress we're making. And the goals we have in each on Early Bird are to exceed where we were at the end of year last year. At middle school, we're using a literacy assessment called Centerpoint that we've used at the high school for 3 years now, and it's our first year of using it at the middle school. So we don't have data from last year around that implementation, and it's focused pretty much exclusively on reading comprehension. So whereas like our state assessment and other assessments kind of assess the broad domain of speaking, reading, listening, Centerpoint really is focused as a kind of comprehension assessment. Teachers, it's gotten good traction at the high school in terms of, again, being a real instructional tool to kind of monitor the standards that have been taught, inform their instruction so that teachers can plan for the next trimester. So we've had our first implementation of that data, and you can see the level of kind of proficiency there. And because it's our first year, we're still trying to measure, what to expect in terms of targets. So we'll continue to monitor our progress as we move forward. But given that it's the first year of implementation, both with these students and with the curricula, it was hard to set a real growth target as we're just learning both the assessment and the curricula with the students. So a few highlights as it relates to some of why we kind of reflected as being on track. So as I said, we're kind of exceeding the anticipated implementation levels for initial curriculum launch. So excited about where our staff is at, their level and capacity in kind of implementing this work. We had all of our observed classrooms that are implementing the curricula all using the adopted materials at the elementary level. So just that's the starting point. And so we're extremely excited about that. In regards to the CKLA, curricula, what we saw in those observations, so you saw in the prior slide, a pretty significant level of performance in that initial implementation. And what, we saw, and Cindy could speak to it in more depth, was that the pacing, kind of the rigor and the pacing of the lessons was really on target with where we needed to be and resulted in a lot of high student engagement. So we're excited about where that stands, kind of just a few months into that work. That started even a little bit later than the EL launch, because we definitely have some staff, as I'll get to one of our challenges, right? Who are managing across multiple new pieces, particularly in the K-1-2 space. But it was really encouraging. It's a more structured program, so it does offer a little bit more of an on-ramp, right, in terms of kind of proficiency. And then, we hit our mark in terms of just, to support that launch, in terms of our initial launch supports that Jesse, Cindy, our partners with EL and CKLA, we had August PD, intensive curriculum PD at that time. We've had release days for teachers to be able to unpack the curricula. We continue to partner with EL for coaching. They've done walkthroughs at each building with building leaders, with instructional coaches, to be able to provide that support. So we're on track with delivering those thus far. Some of the challenges, though, so while, we're excited about where we are now, it doesn't mean it hasn't been without challenge. So as I named, particularly our elementary teachers, managing the implementation of multiple curricula, as we know and we've talked about, has been a challenge. So providing them as much time and support as we can to manage that, is something that we continue to focus on. In some cases, our sub challenges, right, didn't allow full participation of every teacher. We had representation from every school always, but it didn't necessarily get every teacher the access to that full release day in the way that we had intended. So continuing to strategize around that. At the middle school level, we had a small number of classes that weren't observed at that time. Again, these are snapshot. Those are 10 to 15 minute observations. But there were, 18% of classes where we didn't see the adopted curricula in use at that moment when folks visited. So that's an area of focus moving forward. And then the last one is just kind of based on what we saw and kind of a natural developmental point is really focusing on the use of the discussion protocols. What really elevates is on that student responses is the kind of engagement and interaction that students have. And so, as we've gotten through just the initial launch, really focusing on some of those pieces to help improve the kind of dialogue and discourse in classrooms. So some of our key next steps between now and our next progress monitoring measure, we have upcoming on Friday, December 15th, we have a professional development with EL that will include all of our elementary instructional coaches, middle school teaching strategists, and building leaders. So that's a big, kind of mark in our implementation plan. We've been conducting data meetings with the school leaders reflecting on this data that I've shared with you. We did them both as a group and then follow-ups by Dr. Atkinson-Duina and Dr. Ahmed, with individual schools. We have, as I said, we're focusing our professional development for coaches and leaders on those discussion protocols. We think that's going to be a high leverage move to see the student response scores continue to improve as those structures are more in place. And to be able to kind of focus, at the building level, leaders and instructional coaches are providing their kind of coaching cycles and thinking about them both in terms of the content with the discussion protocols and providing support for teachers in their buildings that are needing that. We'll continue to provide facilitated planning 2 times a month to create space for teachers to be able to continue to grapple with the curricula and plan ahead. And then we have another full day release kind of module unpacking for EL. So that's the days where give teachers time to kind of look at the module that's upcoming, unpack that, and get ready for it. So that'll be for teachers who are teaching 3 modules this year. That'll be in February before the last one. So we think with these moves, we'll continue to maintain on track and see growth, in our curriculum implementation results, continued growth there, as well as progress on the outcome measures. In terms of our safe and equitable schools work, the picture is a little more mixed here in terms of where we stand at the end of November after the first trimester. So, we are using 3 results to kind of monitor progress this year, and I think continuing to learn and deepen our understanding of how to kind of track performance in this way. But one is that we've talked about over time is we refer to as the culturally responsive tiered fidelity inventory. So that's an assessment that Dr. Reiger and Joanna Frankel have led with all of our, with all of our schools to assess kind of the status of their school culture system. So where they're at in terms of, their 3 areas of focus, both kind of do they have a team in place that's thinking about school culture regularly? Do they have regular flows of data that they're looking at and reflecting on and engaging on? And then some of the implementation. Are there clear expectations? Have those been taught? Do we have response protocols? Things like that in place. So we're excited about seeing progress that really spans across all grade spans. So you can see here our threshold is that we are shooting for schools being at 70% on that tier 1. So that means kind of like we have a solid foundation, and then we start to move to the advanced tiers, thinking about tiers 2 and tier 3, where those are, starting to provide more small group and targeted individualized interventions at tier 3. So we've seen a significant growth from the end of last year in terms of the work that leaders and staff have put in at buildings to more than double the number of schools that are at that 70% threshold, and that's spread pretty consistently across the elementaries and middle schools and one of our high schools. But we've seen growth in virtually all schools, even if they're not quite at that 70% range. So excited about that progress. Feel like that represents the kind of shoring up of the tier 1 and is going to allow us to kind of, as I'll talk about, focus on some of the tier 2, tier 3, and some of those advanced tiers. The other thought I was going to say is just feels like that aligns with some of the other feedback that we've had, that came from the organizational diagnostic and such, where, our work is that by and large, a lot of our classrooms on the day-to-day are places that are ready for learning. Right. And, where our need is thinking at some of these kind of more significant elevated behaviors and how to support those. So it aligns with both this data aligns with that anecdotal experience and feedback we've had over the course of this fall. However, we're also looking at continuing to monitor our chronic absence rates as well as our suspension rates, focusing for those in the secondary grades in terms of suspension. And there, we're not seeing the kind of progress yet that we want to see. So we do believe, the shoring up of tier 1 is putting us in a good position, but clearly more work to do. I will acknowledge on the chronic absence, we are seeing progress, improvement in chronic absence at the elementary level. So our focus continues to be at the secondary, both in terms of chronic absence as well as the suspension rates. So we see marginal improvement, but know that there's much more work to go there on both of those fronts. So those have kind of plateaued, and we haven't seen them budge in the way that we need them to and want them to. But at the elementary level, we're seeing decreases in chronic absence, in some cases pretty significantly down to single-digit levels for some schools. So excited about that. And feel like we have some foundations in place to continue to make progress on this priority. So here, this is where we kind of got to the at-risk is a little bit of a blend between feeling like elementary being on track with the increases we're seeing in terms of that culturally responsive tiered fidelity inventory, progress on the chronic absence, so seeing positive results there. Again, seeing progress for secondary schools as well on the tiered fidelity inventory in terms of establishing some of those foundations, which is the place to begin, but aren't seeing that translate yet into some of the key outcomes. So what we've accomplished, I think I've reviewed, but, doubling the number of schools that have surpassed the goal of 70%, the elementary chronic absence improvement, launching the secondary SEL curricula as one of our strategies to, again, be able to impact that those outcomes. But some of the challenges, as I've named, kind of the persistence of some of the challenges with secondary chronic absence and suspension. Teaming and evaluation and data are kind of 2 growth areas that we're focused on in the action plans for schools, or 2 of the 3 focus areas. Continuing to kind of build and cultivate shared vision and capacity for kind of non-punitive school cultures. So that's an ongoing body of work to just call out about and be reminded of. And then, lastly here, there's the focus really at all levels is kind of clarity around those response protocols to significant unexpected behaviors that help to lead us to more effective interventions, both in a proactive manner so that those don't happen, and then when those do happen, that we have effective ways to address them and support students so that they do not recur. So that leads us to our set of kind of key next steps. So again, processing this data in terms of building, related to our other priority of building culture and routine around having data, reflecting on it, executing and kind of changing plans as necessary in response. The next two are really focused on that piece that I've spoken about in terms of clarifying, moving beyond that tier 1 focus and thinking, about those advanced tiers and ensuring we have strong response protocols and that we have appropriate interventions in place so that we can provide the proactive support to students so that they don't engage in those kinds of behaviors. And then continuing with some of the school-specific action plans as it results, based on their individual school TFI results, which again, patterns are really continuing to shore up the teams and thinking about their use of data and evaluation of their work. So continuing to grow their capacity to look at, their absence data, suspension, and Swiss data and such. We have the pilot of our kind of intervention model in terms of evolving, the way that students experience in school suspension. That'll be rolling out as another strategy around intervention and providing support, leveraging some of the base curricula, which is the social emotional learning curricula at secondary. And then we have a big training in partnership with Opportunity Alliance and some of our regional partners, Westbrook, South Portland, where we have the International Institute for Restorative Practices coming for a PD in early January. And we have folks from all of our buildings signed up to attend to continue to grow our capacity on that front. So with that, that is the kind of summary of where we stand at the end of November as we, finish the first third of the year and some of our moves that we're focused on in response to this data over the next few months before we're back in front of you for an update in March. So with that, happy to cede the floor for questions, that anybody on the team can answer.
Thank you. Board members, who has questions? And would just, you raise your hand and then I'll call on you. Did I see one over here? Was that Board Member Victor? Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair. And thank you, Deputy Superintendent Townsend. I had a number of questions. Maybe I'll just dive in. First, I was wondering on the schools adopting our new literacy curriculum, the 18% of middle schools that were not adopting it, are those classrooms concentrated at one middle school or were they distributed across the different schools?
There were instances at 2 of the 3 middle schools. Mm-hmm.
And what steps are we taking to ensure that the curriculum is in fact adopted as planned?
Yeah, I think that's where some of the targeted coaching cycles and support will come into play in terms of supporting them. And some of those, again, where we know one classroom, they had just finished the module, right? So some of it, there are some pacing challenges in the first year rollout. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it hasn't been implemented in those classrooms, but it wasn't in use in that snapshot when we were there.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the PBIS work, I have a couple questions. One is I'm wondering what the barriers are for schools to get to 70%.
Yeah, moment.
Yeah. Board Member Victor, could you get closer to your microphone too when you speak? I have a hard time hearing. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joanna Frankel. I'm the Assistant Director of Elementary MTSS Implementation. MTSS is Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. So and I sit in the Department of Clinical and Behavioral Support, so with Dr. Reiger. So a big chunk of my work is around PBIS. So your question was about barriers toward the 70%. So a few things. So there are 3 components of the tiered fidelity inventory. One is about teaming, one is about data practices, and one is about, as the Deputy Superintendent spoke about, sort of tier 1 practices and implementation of those practices. And so what we're seeing as a trend is that the implementation of practices tends to be stronger in our schools right now than the data practices and the teaming. And actually a big part of the teaming, and I'm happy to put this out here to the board, a big part of teaming is around having family and community input. And so there's an expectation that there are family members and community members on teams. And that's often a barrier because of all the reasons you would imagine in terms of time commitment and other things. So I'm also putting out a pitch here publicly that it's a great way for folks to get involved in schools. So that's a big part of it. And then just getting into those data routines. Some of our schools, it's their first year using SWIS, which is a school-wide information system. That's a data house for behavioral data. So just starting to get into those routines.
Thank you. And then I think my last question might be for the Deputy Superintendent. In terms of seeing that for our priority 3.2, that we're on track for elementary school and off track for secondary schools, I'm just cognizant that Joanna is leading the work on the elementary level. And so I wanted to understand more how we're implementing the work in our secondary schools. And is that a staffing need as we move forward?
Well, Joanna's participation in the team and the support of the elementary schools, and Chris, if you want to speak about it, has allowed Dr. Reiger, in addition to his leadership in the department as a whole, to focus his coaching time at the secondary level. So and in addition, and Chris, maybe you can talk about Sarah, we have partners from USM. From USM, Sarah Wilkinson, who's also providing support to two of our secondary schools, one high school and one middle school. So part of our strategy this year is, and he's doing so in alignment with Dr. Ahmed in terms of supporting the work at the secondary level. So part of our strategy this year in terms of just how we're organized, right, is creating kind of the elementary and secondary implementation teams. And those are led by the two executive directors of elementary and secondary. And so have folks dedicated. We've tried to, across the rest of the academic team, identify who's providing support at the elementary and who's providing support at the secondary level so that they can focus. Prior to that, last year, Chris was trying to do coaching across all 18 of our schools, which, was a bit of mile wide, inch deep, right? By and large, except at a few schools where we were able to go deep, but wasn't meeting the needs. So I think we've advanced, right, adding some of that capacity. I think it'll be a question as we look ahead to the priorities in the coming year, right? In terms of how we resource those to be able to continue this progress we're making.
Okay, thank you. I just want to reiterate, I think this work is just absolutely critical to our core mission as a school district, and is really going to be what helps us kind of turn the ship. So I want to just thank everyone in the room today who's doing the work and leading the work, and hope that we fully resource this work, because I don't think we can achieve our strategic objectives, or I should say our bigger picture mission without it. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Figdor. And we're going to come down here to, we're going to go Board Member Knight, then Bondo, and then Bryden. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So as a member of the Greater Portland Public Education System, I go to both Portland High School and PAS. I have a question. What do you define as school culture? What is good school culture? What do you mean by that? Because it's hard to have culture when there is no concept of the goal. If there is no goal, how can we structure something to suit students?
I think these are all excellent questions. I'd be curious, look forward to dialogue to define that together. A couple of ways that we measure it or think about it, and not that it's a definition, I would say, but, we have some of the kind of quantitative measures that are indicators about the quality of a school culture, right? Are students attending, are students getting in trouble, et cetera, right? Those are things that give us a sense of the quality of the school culture. I would say it defines it. There are other measures cultures, as you guys may have experienced, we do the student survey annually, and we gather data on whether students' sense of connectedness to school, right? Do they have an adult that they can go to? Do they, I'm blanking on some of the other questions off the top of my head, but there are a handful of measures. Do they feel safe, right? Things like that we look at to try and get a sense of the quality of school culture. But I think you're right, that really broadly school culture is oriented around kind of a shared vision, right? Why are you there? Right? What are you trying to do by getting there 5 days a week, showing up every day? And I think there's work to do, particularly at the high school level for us, around defining that clearly. I think, as you guys will come to learn, we've been engaging, starting in a conversation about how are we doing at high school, and does our high school work need to evolve to kind of meet the needs of students at this time? And I think there are spaces where we see that it doesn't, and spaces where we see that it does. And so how to grapple with that. But I think it does come down, to have a kind of clear vision and mission that's shared by all members of the community, students, faculty, leadership, families, right? To kind of know their purpose, and kind of believe in that, that's a high quality school culture if you have that kind of investment.
So as you were speaking, you listed things that you believed made good school culture. However, they are all statistics. They are not people. They are not the individual. There's, about that survey you mentioned, there's a interesting phenomena called malicious incorrect statistic taking, I believe, where it is people who take it for the sake of skewing results will skew results. How can you gain active knowledge about the students' lives, the teachers' lives, the way that a school works, if you are basing off of these numbers that are skewed? Because I can speak as a student of Portland High School who's taken 3 of those surveys by now. I know at least 10 people off the top of my head who actively say they did cocaine since 4, and I know they didn't. So
yeah, I think I appreciate that. It's all about multiple measures and kind of looking at different, both quantitative and qualitative data points, and talking to people and looking at that full picture to try and have a good understanding. I totally agree. You can't rely on those solely, and it's like having a comprehensive picture.
can I ask the last time you stepped into a high school for longer than 30 minutes?
Let's see, when was I? I was at Deering last week.
And what did you see at Deering?
Yeah, I love being in the kind of the crossroads at Deering, and just the level of kind of connection and interaction and engagement. Saw some good classrooms. So it was a great visit.
And what was the student quality of life?
Student quality of life. Well, my perception, right, was, it was positive. The kids I talked to were doing good. We were talking about break.
I would like to know if you went dressed in a suit or if you went dressed as a visitor, because that will change a student's reception of you. It changes a student's reception of any of us. It changes everybody's reference of us. If I'm someone who's not having a good time and I see this guy in a sharp suit asking me questions about if my teachers scare me, I'm not going to tell them anything. For all I know, this is someone who's going to get me suspended, especially with Deering and their history of issues systemically. So do you go as a visitor who's just looking to be a normal person? Do you step in? Do you sub? Do you interact with the classmates, or do you just watch?
I aspire to show up as a visitor. I generally only wear suits on board nights. So
We did. And
Makes me feel
board
better.
member night, I think generally you'll start to see that we try to get as much information as we can in as many ways as possible. And then the folks will bring us kind of like the summary. But I think your questions are so spot on to get us to think about how we're interacting with the people in our district. Do you have more questions?
Only in that vein.
Okay, perfect. Then I might pause and we'll get other questions. And if you want to come back to more questions, we can. Beautiful. Board Member Bondo or Vice Chair Bondo, I apologize.
Thank you. We really start interesting now. So I have a couple of questions. I think one of my questions, then member Victor already mentioned, but I just want to emphasize that on those 18% who were not able to use the curricula, So do we know exactly how many students we are talking about representing under those 18%? And if any reason, then we know the reason, some of those reasons why those 18% they were not able to use the curricula. And my sub question at the same time, are we be able to have any feedback for the student who use the curricula to see are the positive feelings, is there any challenges they had about their own thoughts?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Robinson. I'm the Director of Curriculum. Nice to be here. Answer your first question. We don't know the reason. We came for 10 to 15 minutes, and so we really tried to make sure that we weren't trying to make assumptions, just kind of recording what we saw. I will say that at the middle school level, we're at, the expectation is this year 2 modules out of 3. And so there is some flexibility with people doing other things, taking a piece of their curriculum from what they've done in the past, unit that they're really passionate about, and they're doing that. So that, I think, is what we saw in a couple of cases. Deputy Superintendent Townsend mentioned there was one teacher that was in between modules, and she was sort of wrapping up with a reflection about the module. So it was different scenarios and different cases. It's, I can't say one thing that was the reason. Mm-hmm. I will say that, we are still at a place where we're about 70% at beginning, and that is included with the folks that are still getting to, implement the curriculum. So I think we're still on track there. And like you said, really honing in on coaching as a support for teachers moving forward. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, any feedback from the student who
That's a great question. We want to do that. We haven't put that in place yet because we're just at the beginning. So I would really like to get input from students. I think we have anecdotal evidence from teachers that they love the books. That's been kind of across the board. Kids are really excited about the books that they're reading.
So I'm really interesting to have a sense from students, and also, a couple of challenges, by using those adopted curricula from teachers as well. So for the early bird or center point, so I see we have some percentage here. So I wonder, just to understand, if he was what we collect is about the full class participation, or we pick some sample of each classes to figure out those percentages.
For Centerpoint, that's all students taking the assessment. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
And for same with early bird as well.
Oh, same. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I want. Okay. For my last one is on the 3-2, on the tier inventory. So I just wonder, how do we capture those numbers? Are we doing some of the survey, or we have some, how do we capture that? And also to know if those are practices also to the special education as well, or just to other level?
I'm sorry, you're asking about the tiered fidelity inventory?
Yes. Yeah.
It's 15 questions that are about school-wide practices, so they are relevant to all students.
Okay. But is done only for the elementary school, middle school, or is done also to the special education? I mean, the BRAVE program and
well, they're a part of the
each
school,
school.
so that assessment is ideally conducted with a diverse group of stakeholders.
Okay.
So it would include members of BREATHE programming, students at the high school level, family members, ed techs, special ed teachers, as well as regular ed teachers, social workers, counselors, administrators.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bondo. Board Member Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. My first question has to do with the literacy, slide 7. I want to make sure that I'm understanding what I was seeing on that slide. It was the 2 rows.
No.
Yeah. I want to make sure that I understand. So the top row is continuous across time. The bottom row, that first column is not going to continue into the second and third columns because every year there's a new batch of kindergartners, right? Okay. Thank you. So on that top line, I'm curious about so the target at the end of the year 2024, understand that. is this a metric that where the goal is ever going to be 100%, or will there always be some, new teachers? And is it like a 95%, 100% for, eventually?
I mean, yeah, 100% is, not realistic, right? I mean, there are, turnover, rolling on new folks and, improving teacher practice. I mean, there's, we have a goal of 10% in this first year.
Yeah.
We have incredible staff, so excited about the depth and possibility. You can see how it's already launching in CKLA. So I don't know. I don't know if there's been any feedback from our curriculum partners about what to expect. Yeah. So, I mean, we're looking towards continued growth, right? Over time.
Yeah. I'd be curious whether, and it might be too early to be able to say this, but if let's say the goal is 95%, just for the sake of the conversation, would that be end of 2025? Are we talking like 2, 3, 4 years?
There is research on like how long it takes to implement a curriculum, right?
Okay.
It's I think it's 3 to 5 years is where you're kind of getting to around that. Want to add to that?
Keep going. I want to chime in on one thing afterwards.
I will say, like we also looked in math classrooms, and we've been with this curriculum for a while. We're not where we necessarily want to be because of the pandemic. It was like a kind of a rocky implementation, but it's above, it's sort of farther along than EL. And so that's kind of, I think, really good news, right? Like the more you give teachers time to do the planning, to have coaching, right? Like really targeted math coaching or literacy coaching, all of those supports really help improve as a system.
Okay.
And then Board Member Bride, if I can just add one piece to it, is as part of our strategic planning process this year, right, we will be setting goals that are both implementation goals as well as outcome goals, right? What is the impact that it has at the end of the day on student reading, et cetera? And so I think you will actually see that some of the numbers that are here will shift as we talk about the strategic plan, and partially because as we did the implementation this year, there was some level of choice at the school level about whether they were implementing CKLA, whether they were implementing EL, whether they were implementing both, or whether in some cases they were not yet implementing. And so what we're pointing to here, just to like not confuse any folks for when we come to the conversation next year, is this is a snapshot of those classrooms that are opting in to implementing it this year. We are going to have to talk as a group. And as we think about maximizing resources and making sure that we're all moving in the same direction about what it means to have that type of implementation strategy as we go through the strategic plan. That's a conversation, I think, for the strategic plan. This for today, and I think is of real value, is what Deputy Superintendent Townsend shared earlier, which is this is really the first time where we're looking at those two pieces of how are we doing with implementation and what are we seeing as an outcome on students as a result. And so this is in some ways building muscle and showing that we can do this and that we can effectively implement. But you shouldn't, I don't think, walk away and say that if you're a K-8 student, 34% of classrooms are implementing EL effectively or at that level yet.
It's 34% of this classrooms that opted in.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Super. And I mean, I think that like both can be true. Like we're doing great work and we also need to maybe move faster and like get everybody on board. So I'm excited to do all that work together and yay. Thank you very much. My other question has to do with slide 10. Or my other couple of questions have to do with slide 10. Yes. Yep. That's the one. Okay. So I'm not sure that I'm understanding correctly that lower line, because if it's the percentage of students across grades 6 through 12 who have not been suspended, is that ever or in the year? Because, if you're looking at current status and looking to move to 95% within the same academic year, I don't understand how students aren't going to fall off the list, right?
Yeah. It's within this academic year. So
Okay.
sorry, had meant to update the language and the key results. So, and yeah, that's part of the challenge, right? In terms of where we're at. And so I think as we've, begun to debrief this and got some of these measures online to start to look at,
Yeah.
I think there's some additional things we're going to need to monitor over the course of the year to see the impact,
Mhm.
right? So, the other things that we'll be able to track over the course of the year are kind of the number of those incidences, right? And are we seeing decreases in terms of the type and kind of frequency of some of those unexpected behaviors, and particularly the significant ones.
Super. Two more quick questions on this slide. The first one being, so if the target for June 2023 on that middle line is 20% of students being chronically absent, I'd be curious to hear some quick thoughts on what the target might be for June of 2024, because 20% really still feels high. And just thinking about moving forward, what do we think is realistic?
Right. Yes. First typo. That should say June 2024.
Well, so thank you. But also just like moving forward.
Yeah.
20% ever just feels, it's like a lot of students chronically absent.
And we're, again, on track, for those kinds of reductions at elementary, have work to do at secondary, to bring it down. I mean, getting, if we get down in the range of 20%, that's, obviously you're seeing improvement from the year end from last year. Where we're trying to get to as a system is back down closer to 10 to 12%. So, again, starting to the decline, is starting to buck the kind of national trends. We're going to continue to try and, I think target, reduction, 5% reduction a year, right? What I think is a realistic, but, also meaningful change.
And I fully understand that we're talking about problems that are not specific to Portland.
Right.
Completely understand that. Which actually is a really good segue to my last question. And I'm thinking back to, I think it was the last board meeting where Pamela was talking about the visits at these educational utopias in Massachusetts, and the culture of respect between students and staff. And I'm curious about whether some of those concepts and insights that were gained from those visits might be able to inform some of the, moving towards a non-punitive approach to the way our schools operate.
I think both, there's some of those elements that we're continuing to build. I think there are some of the things that are kind of structural, and I think, get to member nights, questions about like how we define school culture and vision. That is part of what we're starting to engage around. So I wouldn't say that's bled out yet, where the design team is still working on kind of processing all that. But, some of the venues where that's beginning to show up is, just ongoing culture work that's aligned with it, and the portrait of the school community, of things that have been in place to foster that. On the instructional side, we have the cross-district PDs, where high school teachers are getting together across content areas. This time we have 5 sessions of that. So starting to think about that in the context of our teaching and learning work is another place where we're starting to try and push forward on that front.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to go to Board Member Upperman and then Board Member Grant.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple questions, and the first one has to do with the literacy piece so that I can clearly speak to others about questions. What is grade level? And so if we're looking at 83% of kindergartners at or above benchmark, that means they are at grade level?
So the early bird assessment is predictive of reading success.
Okay.
So the measures that we chose are the most highly predictive of reading success. So it's not a benchmark per se, and there are several subtests. So there's a word reading part and a language comprehension part. But when we think of the neuroscience of how the brain learns to read, these are the most highly predictive. And to try and create a simple snapshot on how we're doing at implementing a foundational skills curriculum, we narrowed it down to these measures. They had to listen to me talk about foundational skills for a long time. So it was a process to really think critically about which subtests to choose.
Okay, so based on these numbers, that if someone were to look at it, to say that it means that 83% are probably going to be at or above at least some part of reading at their grade level. I realize it's not a grade level test, and we don't do that so much first, second, third grade. It's really third grade when we get, isn't it, when we get to that? But just, if I'm a parent and I was looking at this, or someone just kind of what you're saying here is you're predicting with these numbers their ability to do those skills.
To apply those foundational skills of letter sound, letter name, and phonics to be able to decode words and then eventually encode words for writing.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's the combination of all three that are really critical in kindergarten. So the letter name, the blending, and the rhyming. It's looking at that profile of a student together that helps us understand how their brain is taking in information. And you'll see letter names has improved over the last few years. And so we're working on that blending piece, which will then help them do the non-word reading where they identify a word that is not real and they apply the code to make sense of that word, to be able to recognize the sounds and put phoneme segmentation together.
Got it. As far as middle school predictability of what we were seeing, we don't really have a good read on that at this point.
That's one.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. We looked at it, the Maine through year results. It was the first year of the Maine through year results. Those were significantly higher in terms of proficiency, which we were excited about. But that's part of what we're still kind of making sense of. Yeah, is just like how these relate to one another. Just
trying to get a feel. So as we hear in the spring, what's coming along, that we can interpret it. Thank you. I have a question on 3.2. A couple of them, and let me find so just to get an understanding, when you're talking about tier 1, you're talking about basically getting initially the faculty, the staff, is that correct, in the right attitude to implement, because we're talking about the teaming, the data, and that the teachers are using practices, or the staff are using practices that go along with positive behavior. I hate that, anachronisms are.
There's a lot of acronyms in this.
They're modeling positive behavior, but that doesn't necessarily mean in tier 1 it's positive behavior is happening.
Right. So the idea of tier 1, I think you hit on something, which is that it's about the entire school community. So it's about what the adults are doing, and it's also about what the students are doing. And so it's what you do. The best way I can explain it is tier 1 is what everybody gets. Every student in the school has access to being taught what the school-wide expectations are. Every student in the school has access to positive acknowledgement. Every student has access to specific behavioral feedback. So things like that, that's what everybody gets. And then on the adult end, yes, there's reviewing data and work around teaming. So making sure that those tier 1 pieces are in place. And then we talk about, I think about tier 2 as few, right? It's what some students get. And then tier 3 is the highest level of need. And so the highest level of intervention.
Got it. So that the students may have access to positive, but it does not necessarily mean teachers, when we're looking at the percents here, the teachers are, or the students are actually behaving in a positive. I'm not saying
this is right. This is why we need the data, because we need to see who's responding to that tier 1, to those tier 1 practices, and then who might need more.
Okay, thank you. I guess the question I would also get from someone.
Okay.
I think of who, I always have people asking me questions like, so what are the response protocols for insignificant negative behavior?
So when you say insignificant, do you mean things that don't interrupt teaching and learning? Or significant?
No, I'm saying day-to-day disruptive verbally violent, not physically violent or disruptive. Yes, no, these are disruptive.
Okay, so disruptive behaviors.
Yes.
Well, I think that's what we're all trying to get on the same page about is having some common responses. I can just speak, because my work is around elementary schools, I can speak to that. Dr. Reiger can speak to secondary schools. But that's what we're working on right now is having some continuity that is also that's consistent throughout a school building and transparent to students around what common responses would be.
Got it.
And having a continuum of responses that start from like the least impactful to teaching and learning and move from there.
Okay.
Do you want to speak to that, Dr. Ahmed?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good evening. And yes, responses to unexpected behavior which are disruptive to the classrooms or to the school environment, often, crisis prevention and intervention to just making sure that everyone is safe. That's the first response. But also we know that our students or behavior is a form of communication. So we need to find out what are the needs of these students are. But first, in the initial or the first response is making sure that everyone is safe, but also looking actually like why this is happening and trying to work with all the stakeholders, including the students, and find out what is the proper response and intervention is to make sure that the students are getting what they need. But that's the, it could be case by case and depending on the students' needs, but
They might be hungry,
making sure that everyone is
hangry,
safe. Yes.
hangry, that kind of thing, sort of thing.
But safety is most important.
That's it. The other question I've gotten regularly is when you have a victim, whether it's a teacher or student, of negative behavior, what is the follow-up to treat their emotional and physical safety? I know physical safety would be remove them from the situation, but that bullying situation, not the bully person who is bullied or the person who is being verbally violent, and not even physically violent, but the other person. How are they? What protocols are there for supporting them and making them feel safe? And I don't know, you specific any, it's 101 things, but just some idea.
Yeah. So if any victim of any, harassment, bullying, any sort of discrimination and unexpected behavior, we make sure that they get the supports that they need. With for a student, it could be like making sure that talks to the social worker or guidance counselor in the school, making sure that they get the proper protection that they need to be removed from this traumatic situation that they have been through. So just again, all professionals will be mobilized to just help the student and employees also have a procedure that they can report incidents. And also and Mr. Townsend can speak to, but we have also employee access and support. And so if there is a physical injury or something, there's a reporting mechanism and they can be going to the care that whether it is physical or mental health needs that they need.
Thank you. I think.
Thank you, Board Member
I
Opperman.
think I'm finished.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Grant, and then we'll come back to Board Member Figdor. Any students? Oh, yep.
Thanks. So we can leave this one right up because my questions are about the absenteeism. Just can you one of you refresh my memory? What is the definition of chronically absent? I know it has a sort of mathematical definition.
That a student has missed 10% of the days that they are enrolled. So over the course of a year, we have 175 days, 173 this year, but that would mean they would have 18 absences for any reason. So the difference between chronic absence and truancy, which we'll speak about briefly later, is it's any kind of absence, right? We're focused on students just missing school. Truancy focuses just solely on unexcused absences, and so doesn't necessarily get the full picture.
Okay. And then maybe you can just speculate on this, but what makes it so stubborn? I mean, I do sort of reflect Member Bryden's I think thoughts that 20% is a pretty modest goal, right? But that tells me that you all know something about how stubborn this problem is. I'm just wondering if you might just opine for a minute. I know not backed up by data, but I just want to understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is connected to, well, I'll offer one answer that's broad, and then a little bit here, because I think some of the patterns play out that we see nationally. I mean, I think there's lots of questions still about the impact of the pandemic. For us locally, statewide, nationally, these are the rates that are happening. I mean, we've seen, numbers in some of the large urban districts of 50, 70% in Detroit. I mean, so, really dramatic, kind of increases post-COVID. So, that, you didn't have to go to school, right? So I think you could opine over lots of kind of impacts that's had on students and the kind of their perception to school. I think some of those things impact for us, where we see where we've seen the greatest challenge is at the 11th, 12th grade for students, and particularly amongst our Latinx population has been the area of our kind of greatest concern. And so I think that connects for us about, is school delivering what they need at that point in their lives? And so there's an overlay of students coming at that grade as unaccompanied youth as well. And so the, competing demands that they have for their lives at that point, and how school, a traditional structure of being in school from 8:20 to 2:50 doesn't square with where they're at in their lives. And so I think that's the greatest challenge to start to dramatically kind of make an impact here, is targeting those, that need. But that's challenging to, rethink structure of school for 11th.
I'll finish with probably a lawyerly thing and answer my own question. But it does seem like, even thinking about what I said earlier in my nomination remarks, that there's a lot of this that is outside of the school's kind of purview.
Yes.
And I feel like I want to get at, maybe there's some percent of this that is something that we as a school district can influence, but it can't be all of it, right? Even just based on what you just said, right? There's competing societal concerns, family concerns. So, maybe at some point later in the year, we can go over the interventions specifically we use in this area. But, I guess I'll just leave that as a comment. You don't have to answer, but just something I want to keep thinking about.
Yeah. And I wonder if we could put it on both of our to-do lists to find that small group that we did, the small group sessions that we did with Latinx students, to understand the challenges that they were facing and the interventions that would be needed, because I think it is very telling, Board Member Grant, and you're right, like it is connected to basic needs in a lot of ways, income, housing, all of those things. And so I think that your point is so astute, because the city of Portland is also facing a giant deficit as well, and they're looking at probably cutting that from GA things. So I think just to keep that, all of our, and general assistance is GA, what GA stands for. So thank you for highlighting that. And Board Member Victor, I'm actually going to get students first, since you've already spoken. Let's go down to Board Member McDonald, and then we'll come to Muria. I'll work on it. I'm going to get it. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So I was wondering what schools are currently doing to help with the percentage of chronically absent students, like what current implementations or changes are, being done to help with that.
So each school has a student support team, or SSTs, and they actually look into students case by case, because again, 20% is a number, but just going through the student by name and going like from home visiting and trying to just check with the student, to sending letters, to contacting parents, and trying to find out how you can really have this specific intervention for the specific students. And so that's some of the ways that the schools are working on that.
Okay, thank you so much. I was also wondering if there are any direct correlations that any of you have noticed with chronically absent students and the so-called school culture that we discussed earlier, because I feel like school culture, whatever that means, can have a, really big effect on students wanting to be at school in the first place.
Yeah. So just I'll take a crack on what is school culture is. A culture is like as a community how we interact, behave together, and then the results will be the climate. So what we do together and how we behave in the school is our culture, and then the result will call climate. So that's some people define that way. And yes, if the school culture is, or the way we behave is unsafe, it is a way that it's not welcoming, I'm sure that it will have effect. So if it is where everyone likes everyone and enjoying and celebration and joy, then people will be coming together and staying there. So I think the climate is very important, and it is a result of the way we behave and way we need to become inclusive and welcoming to everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. Are there any ideas or things that you guys have done that you feel have helped to improve school culture, or things that could help to improve it?
So yes, continuously training and learning actually how we can meet the demands of or the challenges that as a community we face. We're not, I want to say, like, schools are not immune to the community. We are part of the community. So there are some challenges that exist in schools, and how collectively we need to come together and create, including students, how to create a community where we are all like inclusive and not bystanders and saying like it's not us, but everyone to be part of it, and we can build an amazing community where everyone is welcome and included.
Thank you so much. I've heard of something at my school, Portland, called like the Compass Group or something like that, and it's meant to help. I think it's sort of based on an in-school suspension organization, sort of. And I was wondering if any of you knew anything about that and could talk about it.
Yes, there is a teacher who's doing this as a part-time, and there is some base curriculum about social emotional learning to be delivered, and it's basically helping students with how they express themselves and how they cope with negative kind of interactions, and how to learn empathy and to work together. So it is, yes, that's that room that is run by one of the staff members. Yes, I'm aware of it.
Okay,
And we are.
thank you so much. I really appreciate you answering all my questions. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I just have one last question, and it's on a different topic, more about the behavioral and reactions to, students acting out. So if a student shows recurring acts of violence towards another student, would it be the victim who in the long term would be removed from that situation, like a classroom, for example, or would it be the person who was inflicting that violence?
I would say, like, unless there is the person who is not the victim will not be moved. So yeah. Unless there is the victim or that person wants to move, but we often make sure that we honor the person who's the victim and their needs.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Board Member McDonald. Board Member Muriwa, did I do better? Muriwa, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have a question for the Deputy Superintendent about safe and equitable schoolwork.
Yeah.
So, from your perspective, what do you call an equitable school district?
Yeah, I mean, we're, defining it such that, the kinds of experiences and outcomes that students achieved are not attributable by any kind of demographic, by race, by gender, by, sexual identity, by any of those measures. So all of our outcomes are not predicted by kind of who the students are.
How are teachers being trained to make sure that their classes are safe and equitable for all students?
Yeah. It's an ongoing thing that we've been engaged in over the past, 7 years since kind of the initial Portland Promise. So there's a handful of different kinds of training efforts that we've had. Our executive director of People and Equity has led a strategy that we've had over those number of years called the Equity Cohort that's trained staff around kind of equity mindsets. And then they've been responsible for bringing back and doing trainings for all staff. So that's been ongoing. And I'll say, the things that we've done, this is a body of work that is ongoing. We've done a number of things and we have a lot more to do. So that's one example. Some of the curriculum work that some of the vertical teams, so we have had over the years vertical teams. So looking at math curriculum, English curriculum, that kind of thing. So thinking about the content of those, right? And so I'm continuing to work to make those more representative of the students in the classes. So that's another area of work and collaboration that's gone on to try and promote, that kind of safe and equitable climate that we're seeking.
And how are you making sure that this training is effective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, there's, a lot to continue to assess. I think there's ways we've had some ways that we've incorporated that in the framework that we use when we observe and evaluate teachers. So we collaborated with teachers around making some adjustments to that. Again, some of the, data points that we talked about earlier in terms of how students are kind of experiencing school are other ways that we start to think about how effective that is, and just trying to look at a variety of measures and then talking to folks and what their experience is and kind of hearing firsthand accounts is kind of a complement to all of that.
All right. And my last question is, are we hearing from students on feedback about safety and equity from the schools? Like, do we get perspective from the students? Are we hearing from the students? Because we can't really rely on the teachers to update us on how the training's going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have had, we've had in the past, kind of a student advisory group, so that, we had the opportunity for direct impact, direct feedback. We've worked with the kind of YEP program through Portland Empowered over a number of summers. I guess there wasn't a cohort this past summer, but in a number of summers to kind of understand the student perspective and to work together, right, on some of these issues. So would be excited to continue some of that and excited about your guys' leadership roles and, potential collaboration on that front.
Okay, now I have more questions.
I'm trying to balance moving us through the agenda. Do you want to hold on to those questions? And then if they don't get answered through other people's questions, we can come back and get them at the end. Would that be okay?
All right.
Okay, beautiful.
Was me.
Yes, Kantiba.
Yes.
Board Member Kantiba, and then Board Member Rosado, and then Board Member Figdor. Beautiful. Go ahead.
Yeah, as we follow thank you first for give me opportunity. I follow very quick, very nice step by steps, how they talk about kindergarten, middle school, and high school, but I didn't see anywhere they talk about Portland adult education, but it's part of the public school. It seems like it's a word apart, but it's in the Portland public schools. And my second question is, we know the first student represent Portland adult education, but was, 3 years ago, 2 years, they were students for Portland adult education. What was the apport that you brought for Portland adult education for the past student who came before us?
Do you want to take the first part of that question? And then I just need a little clarification on the last part.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
Recognize, the value of Portland Adult Ed as part of our whole school and whole city community. The measures that we're talking about today are specific to some of our, the kind of K-12 grades. But we have had at times, presentations about the work of adult ed. So the prior director, has come and done a presentation. That was an agenda item that we sometimes call the board focus on educational issues, to talk about some of the programming at adult ed and how it's grown, because it's really grown over the past, 6 to 8 years in terms of the scope of programming and the number of students served. So yes, tonight's didn't speak to it directly, but there definitely are times when we, kind of speak to and address the work that's happening at Portland Adult Ed.
Yes, and then I have a question that because it's not only, as they said, Portland adult education. If you go in, I don't know if you guys visit all the time, you can see there is teen. I have a nephew that has 18, but is studying by Portland adult education. It can be also in the high school, but those safety that you're talking here is the same safety that I can find there in Portland adult education.
Sorry, say the last part of the question again.
I say at Portland adult education, people, when they just read that word,
right,
they thought that only adults are studying there. But if you guys go there, you're not gonna just find the adults.
Mm-hmm.
You will find the teen, maybe under 20 or 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And are you talking about safety? There is the same safety we found in here is gonna be the same safety as we're gonna find it by Portland adult education, because they are teen.
Mm-hmm.
We have under 18, also 20 years old,
right,
the teenage years.
Yep. Yeah, we know it definitely feels, meets some real needs for students on the kind of flexibility of the programming. And so we have some folks that work directly kind of between Portland Adult Ed as well as our high school teams to think about what's the right kind of opportunities for students. So totally recognize that adult ed is not just like adults, but there's, kind of late teenagers, early 20s students who are enrolled there. And we are focused on some of the safety stuff. So they are doing scheduled to do the same kind of tiered fidelity inventory to kind of assess the practices around safety in the same way. So some of these same things are things that we are doing and supporting adult ed around as well.
And my last question is, in your planning that you're doing there, it's gonna be also, we're gonna find also nurses there in Portland adult education, because in every public school they have a nurse. I don't know if in your planning, you plan also to send a nurse in Portland adult education.
Well, we have had some nursing support through the partnership, through the, one of the great programs is the Certified Nurse Assistant program. And so the instructor there both does some teaching and has provided some nursing support. So we can follow up on that. I know that has been the case. I don't know if there's been a transition in that teacher, but that's how we were trying to meet that need, particularly during this time after COVID, to ensure that there was nursing supports available at adult ed.
Thank you.
And I want to add that I work closely with Portland Adult Ed, Dr. Yamamoto and Ms. Khan, and Visit Classrooms, work with them weekly. Actually, I go there to work with them on their instruction and their curriculum and all other, the needs that out there. So we work closely with Dr. Yamamoto.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Board Member Rosado.
Okay, so this question is for, I guess, whoever wants to answer it. So it's like a two-part question. The first one is whether there's any data that's been collected in the district regarding racial disparities with chronic absences. And if so, what are like the numbers, if you know, like off the top of your head? If you don't, then that's okay.
Yep. We've had excellent question, Member Rosado. It's definitely something we've looked at. We've been kind of rebooting some of our data systems, so we'll be able to provide some of that reporting shortly. Historically, we have seen trends where, as I referred to briefly, where we've seen the most elevated rates for students who identify as Latinx. Of recent years, we actually saw the students who identify as white with increasing chronic absence above, chronic absence rates above students who identify as Black that have been the most recent trends, but we should have updated data about that in the near future to continue to look at.
And then the second question is, what actions has the district taken, if any, to address those disparities?
Yeah, I mean, we have done some of the engagement, and it's work we need to continue to do to think about our students, as I said earlier, who identify as Latinx, to think about how we can make accommodations in their programming to get them into school. For some students, who are older, we have made connections to adult ed that offers some more flexible programming to be able to, so that they can be on a pathway towards a diploma or GED while still being able to work and such. So those have been some of the changes, that we've been working on, but much more work to go.
All right, thank you.
Awesome. Really great questions. And just a little bit of context, we do have a data team that is newly formed. They were empty. The positions were empty for about a year, and now they're full. And one of the things that we charge them with is disaggregating data so that we can really pull things apart and try to understand what's happening based on small groups of students. So I love all of these questions. I think if this is any indication to how Portland Public School students are doing, we're in a good spot. Yes? Right. Okay. And now I'm going to go back to Board Member Figdor. Anybody else have questions? Okay.
Thank you. I just have two quick things. One is first, I just wanted to correct the record. In a comment earlier, it was alluded to or suggested that Deering High School has more behavior incidents than Portland High School. And in fact, that's not the case. And historically, over the last several years, has not been the case. So I just wanted to make sure that that was stated for the record.
Was that in reference to my comment?
Yes.
I was talking about the racism systemically that Deering suffered about 4 years ago. That was uncovered. That's what I was talking about.
I thought it was suggesting that there was more negative behavior at Deering, which was as a result of racism. So.
I'm aware that Portland is not the prettiest place.
Thank you. And thank you for clarifying that. My question is just, it's for the Deputy Superintendent, and I know when in a recent meeting we looked at our discipline data, you alluded to the pilot intervention model on school suspension. I know it's indicated as a next step, a key next step in one of the last slides, and I'm not sure if you've described what that pilot is or not, but I'm not remembering. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about it.
I might actually ask Dr. Reiger to speak to that. He's been working directly with folks and kind of building that out.
Yep. So that work began last January with the creation of the Alternatives to Suspension Work Group, which met monthly and meets monthly this year. And we are this week sharing kind of the pilot of what, for lack of a better term, would be an enhanced in-school suspension. So for students that need to be out of the classroom, but we don't want to be out of the community, we want to have the students present so that we can provide instruction and have access to food, nursing, social work, counseling support, remediation, skills development work. So the pilot, which we're launching now, and we are asking all of our secondary schools to do fully as prescribed with 3 students between now and the end of January, and to collect some data on the impact. So what we know about suspension generally is that it begets suspension. And so the design of this, which I'm happy to share with folks, is really about a fuller assessment and doing what suspension and in-school suspension is hopefully does, which is really do a step back and a stopgap and plan for welcoming the student back with supports in place. And so this in-school model is a fuller assessment of not just their statistics, their attendance, or their past suspensions, but there's interview pieces connected to it around. We actually do the school climate survey, which is 9 items at the secondary level as an interview by the counselor social worker to understand that, so we can follow up. That survey, when we administer it in the spring, is done anonymously, so we're unable to follow up individually. But this would be asking students directly about their sense of safety, their sense of belonging, their sense of fairness about how adults respond when they behave or their peers behave in unexpected ways. It also, a big component is around understanding that students' future orientation, which is often an assumption in high schools that students have a future orientation, that they are thinking about where they want to be when they're 10 years down the road, when they're 25 or 27. So part of this is an interview there's a motivational interviewing component to it to understand where the student wants to go so that the staff can, and the student can reframe the student's experience, not as like, I need to be here, and people need me to learn math, but because of where I want to go, and now that that's a shared understanding, I know that this school's working for me as a student. And then we're going to collect some data to see if this more intensive format can disrupt that trajectory, because we know that students are assigned ISS, that they're often reassigned ISS. And so that's what we're lifting this week.
Great, thank you so much. I really look forward to hearing more about that work.
Go ahead, Board Member Opperman.
Is anything like that going to be tried with middle school in the near future? Because that's even, I think, more.
Oh, yeah. The middle school is where we, when last year, the alternative suspension work group was really like honing in on the middle school. That's where we would be doing it. And then the high schools were like, we need to get in on this as well. So middle school is really the primary target.
So you do across.
All 6 secondary schools. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And student board members, did anybody have a question that didn't get answered that they would like to ask now? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a questions for the deputy superintendent again. So you said that you've had meetings or you've met with students in the past to get more context on like how teachers are making sure that their classrooms are safe and equitable for students. How far in the past was the last meeting?
I'm thinking back now. Things were a little hectic last year. Last spring, and Barrett disappeared. I don't remember when the last educator or student advisory committee meeting was happening, but May is what I would guess. So obviously, suggests the need to re-engage, right? This fall. So that's stuff we can talk about.
Can I just jump in real quick on that piece? As part of the first part of our strategic plan, we had what was called a Listen and Learn series. Right. And the Listen and Learn series involved engaging community members, including students. And so there were focus groups at the student level. For example, I spent well north of an hour just talking to a group of students in Miss Knorr's office at Deering High School. That doesn't capture all of the conversations. I think that one of the things we're trying to balance is how do we get feedback both on a formal and I don't know if that was an act of God or what that was, but we're trying to get feedback on both the formal level, right, which is the survey, as well as informal. And so the conversation that happened in that office, as well as others, get at it. I think it's also fair to say that Dr. Ahmed, Deputy Superintendent Townsend, myself are in the high schools. I'm in every high school more than once a month visiting classes and in that having informal conversations. But we also know that that is a pulse and a snapshot at a given moment of time, and it doesn't capture the experience of all students. And so part of our work is just to continue to refine and to continue to come back to this until we get to a spot where you feel like the questions you're asking, you already know the answer to. Right? Because you can point to what are the practices that are in place that are making sure that this is a warm, joyful school climate for all students. And we still have work to do on that. And so that's clear. That does come out in our surveys. That does come out in the focus groups. The organizational diagnostic that we're using to refine or really actually develop our new strategic plan speaks to that. And it speaks to the fact that overall, students generally like school and are happy. But when you break that down by racial subgroup, it no longer sings with an overall, everybody likes it. And you start to see that. And so we can share with you that organizational diagnostic that gets at some of the root pieces. And I'd also be willing to have conversations with both you, and as we go through strategic planning, we want to run focus groups to say, is this the right stuff? Right? So we are sitting there saying, here's what we heard in the org diagnostic, here's what we're thinking are the right initiatives, and we need to tune that. And we need feedback from students to say, like, that actually sounds like it was created by a 43-year-old guy from Wisconsin, not a 17-year-old in Portland, right? And so we're going to need that help as we go through that process, and there's some ways to do that.
So you do meet with students regularly?
Yeah.
Do you meet with students across all grades? Like, you do?
Yeah, so we do. I will also say that I don't think any of this is done perfectly where we get to all students, right? And we need to continue to refine. And part of it's also about how do we have structures beyond just the survey that captures it, right? But we do. I've been to Portland Adult Ed several times, had conversations with students there for the same exact reason, because we know that Portland Adult Education is part of our schools, and that we want to make sure that they're also having a great experience. And so I echo what you shared earlier about that. And so again, are we doing it perfect? No. Is this a way of us trying to like shine a light on what we see right now and to continue to refine it? Yes.
And I have one more question. I think I asked you this in the meeting in Ms. Noah's room, but this is for anyone to answer. But what are the steps we've taken to make our district better since the protests that happened in 2022? Because I'm asking this because I led the protest and I helped like the other middle schools organize their protests as well. And I haven't been able to check in on the schools, but I've been checking in with the students and they're saying they're still having issues. So what are we doing to improve the district? Because it's not one school that's having these issues, it's multiple schools.
Yeah, so I wasn't here for the initial protest you're talking about. And so what I would ask is that Deputy Superintendent Townsend and Dr. Ahmed talk about both what's happened sort of in the interim and also what's going on now with that.
Yeah. And again, I think, as we suggested, in the beginning, there's continued work at both the middle schools, in particular as continued area of focus, but certainly on up into the high school where, we're needing to continue to improve. So, I mean, some of the things that we've been doing have been trying to kind of build some of these systems to have I know we've talked about it a lot tonight, but to have a more positive school culture. So having systems where it's kind of clear expectations and it's not kind of random rules from room to room, right? And not sure what to expect so that, there's a sense of kind of fairness and kind of evenness. We continue to work on the development of kind of some of the advisory structures to be able to have student voice and to engage in what's happening. So that's again, none of this is perfect in terms of solving things, but some of the efforts to continue to have ways to kind of engage in voice. So continuing to grow those advisory structures, doing some of the training that we've said around kind of restorative, some of the things you've heard about here tonight, are efforts that we've been making over the past couple of years that have more work to go. It's kind of long-term work to kind of interrupt those things. And as well, continuing to make available and investigate and deal with any kind of allegations or claims of harassment and discrimination. So continuing to engage, make available all of the kind of reporting systems, either with known or trusted adults or using the anonymous reporting system, so that we can track that data and intervene on specific cases to be able to support students. So that's a few of the things, but continues to be an area of priority for us.
If I can just jump in and add just two pieces that we reported on, seems like yesterday, but it was probably a couple of months ago, around our equity hiring work. So part of the work has been about continuing to make sure that our workforce, our staff, is more representative of the students that they work with. And so we have seen some gains in that. It's slow, but we have seen some gains in that. Barrett Wilkinson, who was here a second ago and has just stepped out, would have the numbers off the top of his fingertips, but I think it went from about 9% to about 16%, 15%, somewhere in there. And so part of that is that work. And then Barrett Wilkinson, who is the executive director of People and Equity, also leads our equity work, which is really around mindset and around the practices, right? So how do we identify our own implicit bias, and how do we make that conscious so that we're thinking about that as we are working with and engaging with students in schools, so that we are very consciously establishing more equitable, more safe, more welcoming school environments for all students. And I think that what you will hear as we go through the strategic plan is that we have a drumbeat going on that, but it may not be going as fast as we need it to, or as loud as we need it to. And so I encourage you to continue to push us as we go into that strategic plan to make sure that that is still a priority in the budget and that is a priority in the plan.
I have one more question. Are the solutions like general solutions, or are you like, do you have specific solutions for specific problems? Because I think we need to like visit the schools, hear from students, and hear what's actually going on instead of like hearing just like the general things that go on, because we're not going to be able to fix a problem until we get to the root cause. So like for example, if I say like I'm bleeding, you can't just give me a Band-Aid. You have to like make sure like where's the bleeding coming from, and like how do I prevent the bleeding instead of just like throwing a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah, so the process we went through to gather all the data was designed to get at that, right? So our org diagnostic didn't just say, is school climate good or bad, right? But really dug into, how do people feel? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel included? How does that break down by race? How does that break down by school? So that we can start to get at it. The conversations, the focus groups, then added really the qualitative piece to that to get at it. It's also the case that our schools are at the high school level, particularly 4 very distinct schools, 5 really distinct schools if you count paths in there, right? And that each is different, and that students' experience in those vary significantly. Right? That one student may describe having a great experience for 4 years and another that didn't love it. And so I think that our goal is to figure out what is exactly the reason that students may not have a great experience, and to make sure that we do that. And so our strategic plan has been pushing us and has been pushing the steering committee, which is both includes student, staff, community members, to get at what is the root cause. And because we have 6,600 students, I don't think we'll always do a great job of getting to the individual root cause, which is why we need to think about what are our structures that get at that, right? So schools have things like advisory or crew, which is designed to start to think about what's the individual experience and how do we know what Ryan is experiencing at Casco Bay, and that we match up his crew advisor to make sure he has what he needs in place. And we're early in this work, and we have a ways to go. We're also not starting from zero. And so it is an iterative, ongoing process.
Did you have a question? Yeah, Board Member Ali.
I just wanted to go back to talking about suspension. I wanted to know, like, are there any trends that we're seeing in suspension for like different racial categories of students? And also moving forward, what is the plan to safeguard students against implicit bias or discrimination from adults in the event of like misbehavior or like facing suspension? Like, how are we going to protect students so that a situation is not escalated because staff or teacher has a like implicit bias, oh, this person looks like this, so I'm gonna, react this way, compared to if another student had this similar behavior?
So yeah, our data mirrors, unfortunately, too many other communities in which we do see disproportionate, kind of disciplinary outcomes for students who identify as students of color. So that has been true in our data as it is in other places. So, some of the things that we've spoken about tonight are work that we have ongoing to try and mitigate for that. Some of the mindset work so that we're all kind of coming with those questions, right, of interrogating kind of those interactions and trying to distinguish when it's implicit bias playing out, right? And when it's, a function of behavior that needs to be addressed, right? But can interrogate it. So that's kind of collective work that we're engaged in using, trying to continue to shift to understand how we use restorative practices to be able to have, different kinds of ways of responding as opposed to just purely a punitive approach, that is kind of the classic traditional discipline approach is another strategy that we've been building towards to be able to help mitigate for that. So those are just a couple of the initial things that come to mind. Did you want to?
Yeah, first, thank you very much. I'm so happy to, to be here and real great questions. I appreciate this. And yes, Ms. Ali, about there is mindset and support that the teachers and the staff need, and skill building, as well as I said, as a community, we need to be really learning how to work together and be together. And also there is accountability piece. So we're going to make sure that this data is presented to the schools and talked about. So we need to create that system where we will talk about data and say, this is what we see with the leaders and talk about that as well.
Who is represented in the restorative justice circle? Is it just the student and staff, or teachers, or is the parents involved? How are we going to support, who's at the table for the restorative justice?
The restorative practice or circles, or some of them are very much some circles that we have preventative that, like community building. But when there is, some harm or unexpected behavior happens, the schools who are doing I would name in Casco Bay, they have really great, circles that they, community circles that they work on, resolve things. But there's a need for capacity building, but there are also some leaders and some people who are trained who facilitate these circles. And there are some students who are, training from all high schools, training with youth-led justice. We also have partnered with community partners like Cumberland County restorative practice specialists, as well as youth-led justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Board Member Ali. Any other questions? Right. Thank you, staff, for responding to all of those questions so thoughtfully. Thank you, board members, for asking those questions so thoughtfully. And I'm going to move us on now. To the report of the secretary. So the report of the secretary is basically we just approve notes from the last meeting. So up first, we have the consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes for November 21st, 2023. Are there any corrections to those meeting minutes? And this is if you read the minutes and you saw a correction, you'd say it out loud now and we'd make an amendment. But if there are none, then the meeting minutes are going to stand approved as distributed. And now I'm going to move us into new business. And new business is when we have things that we're eventually going to vote on. And when we have something that we are going to vote on, we typically have a first read where we can talk about it and make it better, and then a second read where we then vote on it. So tonight, everything is a first read. So tonight we have first reads on to approve changes on policy JHB on truancy, and a first read to approve changes to policy JKAA-R, use of physical restraint and seclusion. Deputy Superintendent Townsend, is there anything you want to say now or just wait till workshop?
Workshop is fine.
Okay, beautiful. So we're going to move into adjournment right now, but we'll stay here to do a workshop around those two policies. Students, I know this has already been a long night. If you can stay for the workshop, I recommend it, but if you can't, that's okay too. And just be on the lookout for an email from me in the next few days about what to expect for our next meeting and next steps. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn? Board Member Victor, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say it might be worth explaining to the new board members why we do workshops versus talk about issues within the agenda of our meeting.
Yes, I mean, maybe you have a better, do you want to share your reasoning? I don't know if I have the official one in my head.
Sure. We hold workshops typically before we're going to vote on an issue to get into some of the thinking behind what we're doing and to be able to, in a less formal way, be able to ask questions. So it's, in addition to the backgrounding materials you have, it's a really good forum to just be able to ask whatever is on your mind about the vote that we will then take at the next meeting.
Thank you, Board Member Victor. So with that, moving back to adjournment, is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Board Member Bryden. Is there a second? Board Member Opperman. Thank you, all in favor. You can raise your hand on this one. We don't have to talk. So meeting is adjourned at 8:08.